Welcome to Incubate Talent, a podcast and network of STEM ecosystems who help connect the next generation STEM workforce of students and teachers by spotlighting the amazing stories, opportunities, and areas in need in your communities and industries. I'm your host, Scott Ross. Incubate Talent tells the stories of teachers, students, professionals, and communities helping make a difference in STEM from cradle to career. Be sure to subscribe to Incubate Talent wherever you're listening for more episodes. Follow us on major social media platforms and check out our website, incubatetalent.com, for exclusive video content of STEM in action and to submit your ideas of STEM stories, leaders, and events that you'd like for us to share. Thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to helping spotlight, connect, and advocate for STEM in your communities. Welcome back to Incubate Talent. I'm your host, Scott Ross, and today we have an exciting episode where we're welcoming Dr. Lee Meadows, who's going to help set the stage for us for the Alabama STEM ecosystem. Lee is a science educator and the executive director of the Alabama STEM Council, where his work focuses on building the STEM education system in Alabama to address the needs for a thriving STEM workforce. Lee is a teacher at heart, and he has taught high school chemistry, physics and physical science, college chemistry, and many teacher education courses, especially in science teaching methods. He spent most of his career as a professor in the School of Education at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, guiding teachers to improve their practices, especially with better skills for inquiry and implementing science and engineering. He has also led the implementation of UTeach, Alabama's first UTeach implementation site. He has written and spoken across his career on the teaching evolution in the Deep South and is the author of The Missing Link, an inquiry-based approach for the teaching evolution to all students, and co-author of Making Sense of Science and Religion, Strategies for the Classroom and Beyond. We're incredibly excited to share this with you today. Thanks for joining us. Lee, welcome. I appreciate you joining us here today.
It's a pleasure.
This is a great place to start. As you know, there's lots of fascinating things happening across the state of Alabama, and that the Alabama STEM Council is certainly leading. How about we start there? Can you just tell us a little bit about the Alabama STEM Council, its role, and a lot of the major initiatives that it has going?
Sure, they're happy to. The role of the STEM Council, in a nutshell, is improving Alabama's STEM education system so Alabama gets the STEM workforce that it needs. Thank you for that kind introduction. I have dedicated my life to helping teachers teach better so students can learn better. So learning science, learning STEM is at the heart of everything I do. But as I stepped into the STEM Council work, there's that key piece of where's Alabama going to get its STEM workforce?
Right.
And if we don't grow our own STEM workforce, we're not going to have one. And so that's been a real privilege of my work with the STEM Council, is to begin to help move a clear strategy in that direction.
Certainly. It's an exciting time too, just progression of technology and just where we are today with the workforce changing. Can you speak? I mean, how do you see some of those industries shifting and the workforce landscape across the state?
Sure. I think what I usually do is put that in terms of the classroom, because most adults, people listening to this podcast, when they think about how they learn math and how they learn science, they think about listening to lectures, doing worksheets, sitting still, waiting, and being in a desk. And those things have almost no value in today's modern workforce. Nobody hires a graduate and puts them in a cubicle, pays them six figures, and said, "Here, do this worksheet."
Right.
So when you, as you know from where you work, the modern STEM workplace is a place of thinking and solving problems and creativity and, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's coming next. What do we do when we don't know what to do?
Yes. Yeah.
That's how kids should be learning. They should be graduating ready to work in that environment.
Yeah, we get very fixated on some of the specific skills and things that might be taught in a curriculum, but the foundational skills of critical thinking and problem solving, presentation skills, like there's so many things.
Working on teams, working
Certainly.
with people, conflict resolution, all of that can be taught in the STEM education system, especially K-12. Kids can learn how to do that. We're not doing that well in every classroom in Alabama.
Got it. Yeah. So let's talk about the concept of a STEM ecosystem, and that's a term that is extremely important, but it can also be very broad. So can you help us understand just what in your mind is a STEM ecosystem, and what does that mean to the state of Alabama?
Sure. STEM ecosystems are new, so technically the name of them, the long play version is STEM Learning Ecosystems. And it's a hard thing for a lot of people in Alabama to even wrap their head around of what is that. The key thing is because we don't have any. There are about 110 active STEM learning ecosystems that exist in other parts of the country where they're doing the work. We only have one, and that is the Alabama STEM ecosystem, and it hasn't even been around for a year. Think of a STEM learning ecosystem as a purposeful gathering of all the stakeholders that can build that STEM learning pipeline that I talked about earlier. So, and that would be in a community or a region. All the stakeholders are working together so that kids are engaged in STEM, they're learning STEM, and when they graduate from whatever level they graduate from, high school to PhD, they're ready to work in Alabama's STEM economy.
And who do you see as those stakeholders? Who are you all trying to get a seat at the table to be able to help write that next chapter?
You're going to put me on the spot and try and make me name all 8, and I can never do this. But I will try. So the 8 identified stakeholders in STEM learning ecosystems, K-12 schools. First off, you have to think about who would be at the table to build all that. Well, then the 8 make perfect sense. K-12 schools, community colleges, higher ed institutions, after school and out of school, they're vital because they keep kids engaged in STEM.
So many fascinating stories. Yeah.
Public libraries, which is an interesting one.
That is.
And then homes, communities, business and industry. I think that's the first time I've ever done that. Truly. I think that's the first time. Yeah. Now, I did look at the graphic yesterday, so I had a little help.
Yep.
So those 8, and the key thing is business and industry has to be at the table because there's a push-pull with business and industry. They have to be defining what they need from workforce and helping everybody else in the system understand that. But then they also have to be providing the job. So when kids do what we want them to do in a STEM learning ecosystem, and they learn and they're engaged in STEM, there needs to be a job waiting for them.
Yeah, there has to be that connection to the workforce. Yes. What are the career pathways, and how can industries get involved really? Yep. So what's happening that's right? Like what are the successes that we're seeing right now with obviously the STEM Council coming in? I know there's been a lot of workshops where we're starting to form these ecosystems, and so there's a lot of great progress. What would you spotlight right now as far as the successes?
I think the key thing is how the state of Alabama is investing in these STEM learning ecosystems. The STEM Council is managing a $5 million investment in STEM learning ecosystems. Literally yesterday, we found out that the checks are in the mail. And that's the checks that are going out with the first $1 million investment of the $5 million appropriation, with the $1 million investment that are going out to 23 recipients who are starting the planning of STEM learning ecosystems across the state. A few of those are regional. Most of those are grassroots, local community efforts. And this is the planning process. It's a 3-phase process that we are leading with this $5 million appropriation for this year that will take each of those communities, let's just use that term, remember it could be a region, but each of those communities through the stages of planning, the initial planning for their ecosystem, the design of their STEM learning ecosystem, and then initial implementation. And right now, there is another $5 million under consideration in the legislature that the STEM Council could turn around next year and make that investment in more STEM learning ecosystems.
Wow.
And this has captured a national attention. Alabama is across the board is catching national attention for what we're doing in STEM, but this $5 million state investment to build STEM learning ecosystem, I don't know if any other state is doing that. And it's making it's fast work. It's honestly stressful work, but it's happening.
And it needs to happen, right? Again, we talked about what's happening to the workforce and just the pace and how things are changing, and the time is now. But that's also why we're here. I think that speaking with you here today, there's no doubt a lot of fascinating things to come. So, kind of back to that question of success. So we're forming these regional ecosystems. We can think of a STEM ecosystem at the state level, but specific regions within a state, and then the communities within those, and then we have the stakeholders as well. And so, going through the design and the the planning and the design and the implementation. If we fast forward a little bit, what in your mind does success look like once they complete some of those phases?
Well, it makes me think of something that happened 2 weeks ago. So McWane Center is one of the anchor organizations for these new 21 are all new, are starting from scratch. And they invited me to kick off their initial meeting where they pulled all the partners together. And so I'm in there, I get a nice moment to be able to talk about the STEM Council, but I'm looking around the room and I'm seeing people that I've worked with for 10, 20, even like 30 years, and we've talked all through this time of working together about we just need to get people together and to get them on the same page and rowing in the same direction to build what we know, what we all need to do. And then all of a sudden, the money is there for McWane Center to pull all of these partners together and start that work in Jefferson County and beyond. And it just hit me. I've been at this work since 1993.
Feels different. Yeah.
Yeah, because we actually have a pathway to get everybody together and to say, what do you in this community want to build? And the thing that I really admire about the National STEM Learning Ecosystem Movement, that's anchored by a group called TIES, and the brilliance behind that is Jan Morrison. And what she's helped us they always help us remember is this has to be organic, and it has to be a solution that works for that community. So we are launching 23 new ecosystems. 2 were already at work piloting, and then the 21 new that I mentioned. Every one of those is going to be different. Every one of those is going to be unique.
And they need to be.
to be, but that's because of the local buy-in, the way the process lets all those representatives from those 8 stakeholders decide what do they need to do in a rural area in the Black Belt or in Mobile or in Huntsville, or the solutions have to be customized, and they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, and the cross-region, or I'll say cross-ecosystem collaboration, I think is, again, it's an exciting time because you may have these rural areas or real communities in need where, now in this day and age, there could be more of a connection of what's happening in North Alabama, and a kid down south can actually understand what that career pathway might look like for them. It may not be within their 20 or 30 mile radius, but having that perspective about what else is available to them is very exciting.
And that's part of the role of the Alabama STEM ecosystem. That's the one that is officially working. So nationally, there's a community of practice where everybody who has formally launched their ecosystem is working together. That's the one ecosystem that we have in place. Now, we had that one in place, and then this $5 million opportunity hit the STEM Council. We pivoted our work to launching these new ecosystems, and the Alabama STEM ecosystem has just kind of sat there because we were trying to get these launched. But what you just mentioned, who's going to bring these 23 launching ecosystems together? That's going to be the Alabama STEM ecosystem.
Yeah.
Pulling everybody together, helping them network, helping them to, when one group finds a solution, how can that help others? Also, who's not included now? Who's not in the picture yet? We've got a map where we can see lots of counties are associated with an ecosystem, but a lot of places in Alabama aren't yet.
Yet. Well, so let's talk about that then. So, beyond the successes, some of these communities, areas that are underrepresented, when it comes to advocacy and understanding there's a lot that's still happening, and as the ecosystems are going through a lot of their planning and design, a lot of that feedback and output, there's still a lot to be determined. But where do you feel like the biggest areas of advocacy are right now, focus areas and areas where there really needs to be a lot of attention?
It's weird to say, but I think it's patience. Because people in Alabama don't know what STEM ecosystems are. There's not a well-functioning STEM learning ecosystem that people can look at and say, oh, we want that. And the reason why I say patience is it's very easy to say, well, why isn't anything happening? We've got that. Well, it takes all three phases of planning, design, and implementation for that ecosystem to get up and going. But even through that whole process, everybody involved has to themselves figure out, well, what's a STEM learning ecosystem? Because remember, we don't have any. And that's one of the problems in Alabama is we don't have communities working together to build this. And I've called it a pipeline, but pipeline's not a good word. Ecosystem is the best word. For those of your listeners who are familiar with natural ecosystems where everything's related and everything's connected, that's exactly what happens with STEM learning. You've got to have homes, after school, K-12, business, and I can keep going with all that again. You've got to have them all designing that ecosystem, that learning ecosystem, and then nurturing it. And we don't have that yet. But the great thing is now we're beginning to pull people together in those conversations.
Yeah, taking the voices of communities or organizations, schools, those stakeholders that are have a lot of success and offering a lot of the STEM career pathways, but then elevating the voices of the communities in need to really make sure that the challenges and barriers that, again, to your point, are going to be different and unique in each of these regions, and just making sure that those voices are at the same table and combined. Yeah.
And one thing this makes me think of too, now I'm the biggest nerd in Alabama. That's just my
that.
That's just
you might have some competition over here. Yeah.
That's always my tagline. I was the kid who loved STEM before STEM was cool. I love science and math and all of that. Another piece that we're going to have to crack the code on is a lot of adults had bad experiences in STEM, and they would be the first to say, I'm not a math person, I'm not a science person, I can't code, all of that. And it's so easy for them to then deflect kids from those pathways.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where we've got to have the change. And the great thing is there's already so much going on in Alabama right now where we're finding out every kid can do STEM. And that's another challenge that we're going to have to really wrap our heads around is how do we message it? How do we engage kids and we support kids so that all kids are successful? I don't think every kid needs to work in a STEM industry. Some just aren't going to like it. I think every kid should have the opportunity. They should have the education where if they want to take a good STEM job, they can. But the real challenge is we've got to break through the thinking of STEM is only for, and then you fill in the blank with whatever comes in your head. Those kids. No, we will not have the STEM economy in Alabama that we need until we have every kid ready and moving into the workforce if they want to.
Right. It's very much about that pipeline or that pathway. Mm-hmm. And even if that pathway, they're not necessarily learning to excel in math or coding, they're learning some of those foundational skills that they can translate it to another industry. It doesn't have to be a STEM industry, and the state's going to be better for that, right? And that's great. So you mentioned I'll say being a nerd at a young age. I'd like to ask, what was that spark for you? When did it happen? Do you remember specific moments? Were there specific people that kind of influenced your interest in a STEM pathway?
Yeah, the two things that I think of, I grew up in a small town in Mississippi, Oxford, Mississippi, had a good education where I was getting good science and math experiences in school. And that's part of it. But the bigger part was being in nature. I grew up in a hunting and fishing family. I didn't really enjoy that very much, but I was in the two places we lived. We moved when I was in upper elementary school. There were woods nearby. Mm-hmm. And, for your younger listeners, there was all I could do was watch TV. I didn't have anything. There were no computer games. There was nothing. Or
go into the woods.
Yeah, I was going into the woods.
Right.
And there were so many experiences where I learned to love nature and, of course, the connection to science. I remember Mom wouldn't let us play outside in the rain if it was lightning. But if it wasn't lightning, we could play in the rain. I remember I spent, it seems like hours or even a whole day in like a big, broad, not ditch. It was almost like a little creek. And I was changing how the water was flowing. And I was learning about water flow, which turned into knowledge of how electricity flows because of water model. Yeah. So that was one thing, just experiences in nature. And then the other thing was a classroom experience. When I was a senior in high school, I took physics, and I had a nun for Sister Lois Dolphin. Of course, we called her Sister Flipper behind her back. Of course we did. It was a public school, but she was our physics teacher. And what Sister Lois did for me was broke me out of kind of the worksheet memorize. I was a good memorizer, and I was good at memorizing the facts of science, but she asked questions that just blew me out of the water. And I would be working on something in the lab, and she would just kind of appear. I don't know. I think it must have been a nun power. I don't know. She was just standing there, and I'd kind of look up, and she'd ask me a question, and I would just be mystified because it was such a good question, and I didn't know. And I'd look down and think, and then look back up to answer, and she'd be gone. She would just have disappeared, and it was that nun power again, but she made me think about science. And that opened a door where I began to understand really what science was. And it wasn't memorizing facts. It was doing things in the lab. And I just became fascinated with all of that.
That's great. Yeah, those influences, whether it's a teacher or, your own families or communities, those things matter. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that story. So, you talk about some of the young listeners. What's something that you want students to know about what is happening in the state, and the opportunities that are out there for them today?
I think part of it is what I've said before. As students invest in their STEM education, they are investing in a future where they can get a good job and hold on to it for life. Mm-hmm. But also for any students who are listening to this, for them to understand that a lot of adults in Alabama are working and working hard to build STEM education, STEM experiences for them to help them be successful. That's what these STEM learning ecosystems are doing. They're about kids, they're about students, and improving their lives, basically. And I hope that's encouraging. And then a couple of things, there are a lot of things so kind of, let me backtrack a little bit. There are so many great STEM opportunities out there for today's students. And the key thing, take advantage of them. Mm-hmm. After school, out of school, a couple of things I think of that are just, I'm going to pitch out there that the STEM Council has brought to Alabama that are new. First is our Chief Science Officers program. So we have 200 CSOs, and these are middle school students and high school students who are named as the Chief Science Officer of their school.
Of their schools.
Of
wow.
their school.
Yeah.
So and then they're trained by CSO International. So there's an international organization that trains teenagers in how to speak to their peers and adults on the value of STEM. Last year, we brought 200. We recruited and started the work of 200 CSOs around Alabama, and the STEM Council wants to do more. So that's something that students can look for if they're middle school and high school. Is there a CSO program in their school, or would they like to help land one in their school? They can reach out to the STEM Council.
There you go.
Second thing is UTeach Alabama. So yes, I helped start UTeach. It was by far the most joyful work of my career. And there are now 7 UTeach sites in Alabama.
Wow.
So at a UTeach site, you can a undergraduate student can get a STEM major and a teaching certificate with no extra time. And so then there are a lot of options. And what I found at UAB with UAB Teach was the thing that was so joyful was I was working with young men and women who had chosen a STEM major and then were stepping up to the challenge of also learning how to teach STEM. And they are rock stars and rocket scientists. They are amazing young men and women.
That's great.
And I've heard this around the UTeach nation. So there are now like 56 universities that are doing this, the UTeach model nationally. So I think that's one thing for high school students as they're thinking about going to get a STEM major. Go to the STEM Council website, find out where the 7 UTeach sites are, where as they choose an in-state university, a place where they can do both. And a UTeach site never requires an undergraduate to commit to teaching. It's just you've got options. When you graduate, you can take your STEM degree to a STEM career. You can go teach. If you decide...
Or do both.
Or you do both.
Yeah.
You can go back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's incredible. I mean, we often, when we think about the career pathways for STEM and we focus on the opportunities that are there for the students, the fact that you all are, implementing different things to help create the next generation of teachers, because we need more teachers, right? It's so important. So whether it's providing those opportunities to students to get into a teaching pathway, or even providing resources for teachers, that is incredible.
Well, and I mentioned before that Alabama is catching national attention with STEM. UTeach Alabama is another one, because our legislature has has created a $4.5 million line item to support the work of UTeach Alabama. I don't know of any other state that is making that kind of investment in ending the STEM teacher shortage, and I don't know of any other state that has the potential that Alabama does now to actually end the shortage of science and math teachers. UAB Teach is fully implemented. These other 6 universities are going to take 3 or 4 more years to build their program out. But when they are all built out, that will be 250 new STEM teachers every year from that moment on.
Yearly. Wow.
Yearly.
Wow.
And all of this is because the legislature had the vision for, we can do this.
Mm-hmm. So keeping it around teachers. So what is something? I mean, and it'd be hard to beat, I guess, the UTeach program. It sounds like an amazing resource, especially for students and those interested in teaching themselves. What is something that you want the average teacher to know about what's happening right now, and just what is happening across the state?
Sure. Where the STEM Council is kind of planted its flag is the value of inquiry-based approaches. You mentioned that in your bio, or in my field, it's science and engineering practices. On the STEM Council website, listeners can find the modern STEM classroom, where it talks about how the science classroom and the math classroom should be reconfigured to what we talked about at the beginning of how do students, what are the skills, knowledge, abilities that students need to succeed in the work world? Well, then let them learn that way.
How do we get STEM in action?
Yes. Yeah. And so the classroom, I mentioned, we don't need to have kids doing worksheets, listening to lectures. There's no value in that in the modern economy. That might have worked for learning. That might or might not. I'm not going to argue that. But we can have kids learning STEM in the ways that we talked about before, working on teams, managing information, creative solutions, all of that. They can learn STEM K-12. And that's where we really need teachers to, if they're still teaching traditionally, learning to make that shift to this modern STEM classroom that, first off, it's exciting for kids. Yeah. Kids like it. It's happening in school systems around the state, like Talladega County schools. It's happening. But it also it's much better for getting all kids ready for the world that they're going to live in as adults. They're going to understand STEM better. Mm-hmm. But then also they can walk through the doors to a good job.
So we, when we were talking about the different stakeholders earlier, we were talking about students and teachers in schools and K through 12 and obviously higher education, but industry was also a super important one. So what is something that you want the average company to know about STEM ecosystems and how to better collaborate with STEM in Alabama?
Yep. First off, They business and industry leaders need to know that they're an essential partner in STEM ecosystems. STEM learning ecosystems can't do their work without business and industry at the table. Right. Any listener who goes to the STEM Council website can find a list of the 23 new STEM learning ecosystems. They can look down that, they can look those up, and they can reach out to those leaders, or they can reach out to Renee McNeil, who works for me. She's the STEM Council's STEM ecosystem coordinator. She can help them get connected. I want business and industry leaders to know there's a place for them to plug in these STEM learning ecosystems, and also they are absolutely essential for STEM learning ecosystems to function correctly. That also means that they're at the table helping build this ecosystem that's going to give them the workforce that they need. Think about some of our rural areas where there is a job opportunity there, but kids may not know that the job is there. They also may not know what they need to do to be prepared for that job.
Right.
A STEM learning ecosystem can do all of that. One other thing that I still hadn't cracked the code on this one, but it's some work that I still hope the STEM Council can do, is business and industry leaders have a vital role in helping education leaders make the case for change. I mentioned how traditional instruction has almost no value for the workforce, today's modern workforce. The reason why I say that is because the first thing that business and industry leaders in Alabama said to me when I became executive director of the STEM Council was, Lee, graduates at all, help us tell people in education that graduates at all levels come to us and they are not ready to work. And by all levels, I mean graduates from high school, community college, four-year master's and PhD. they're not ready to work. Our education system isn't working as it should, and that's where we need business and industry leaders helping superintendents and building principals and other educational leaders make that case for change of why. You mentioned teachers before. Why do teachers need to teach differently?
Right.
Well, it's great for kids, and it's also great for our economy.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about the different career pathways and the skills that are needed to succeed in those, but how the organizations can give back and provide feedback to the schools. I mean, is it just schools and degrees, or are there trade skill STEM resources that are out there that you see that companies can help contribute to?
I think the main thing right now is I still think about helping the education system pivot from how kids are learning now to how they can be learning with that modern STEM classroom that I mentioned. The reason why I focus on that pivot is, like, I haven't looked at this year's budget, but K-12 education in Alabama, that is over a $6 billion investment every year. But it's not pointing in the right direction. That's why I think business and industry leaders can help make that case for the kind of change where that $6 billion investment is pointed in the right direction, and we start getting the graduates. And that can be kids in a CTE program who are graduating from high school ready to work. We need that. But it's also, we need kids who are getting a 4-year degree in biology, chemistry, physics, biotech, whatever it is. We need them too, all of them.
Yeah, and those skills are important. I mean, as a technology professional, or just someone who does a lot of hiring and interacting with a lot of recent graduates, there is a gap, right? There are certain skills that when they're coming out of school, there's probably some textbook. There's no doubt some textbook knowledge, but there are many other skills that I think industry needs to contribute to the different curriculums and things that are out there to make sure that the kids that are especially getting a degree come out prepared, or to your point, even just a high school graduate going out and getting a CTE credit, that those are teaching some of the skills that again, STEM in action, right? Being able to provide an impact on day one with some of those hands-on skills.
And I think I'm going to go back to adults who are listening. Most adults who are listening probably have no idea what I'm talking about when I say the modern STEM classroom, because they never experienced that. For them, when I say math, they're thinking about a teacher at the front of the room at a chalkboard doing a problem, and then saying, okay, now do the 20 problems in the textbook for your homework tonight. That's not the only way to learn math. With UTeach, I had Dr. Ann Dominic as our math pedagogy leader. I had master teachers who had spent their careers teaching math differently. Kids can learn math in a different way where it's much more engaging, it's much more problem focused. They learn problem solving, they learn to persevere. And then the most important thing is almost all of the kids in the classroom do learn to think mathematically. That's the biggest shift. So, but all that to say, adults often don't have this mental image. Now, there are schools around the state that they can go and visit and see all of this in action. But I would love for adults who've never seen that to keep an open mind, because I know it works. I spent most of my career at UAB coaching science teachers in how to teach differently. And for science, that means stop lecturing. Because first off, lectures are really boring. Kids hate it. They think it's worthless. But then there's another way to teach where kids, and I know this from doing in the high school classroom, from coaching teachers in it, there are ways that kids can really learn science where they're actively involved in it.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, I feel, at least for my personal story, I feel very that's deeply important with math. That is a subject that I struggled with, and I know a lot of students do. And that's was a big barrier for me as a student. Fortunately, I developed some other skills that it kind of led to my career pathway. But now, fast forward as a parent. You're right, having that open mind, as I sit there with my kids trying to do their math homework at night, it is completely different than how it was. And sometimes, especially in the moment, it can be very frustrating, if it's different than how you learned how to do it. And having that open mind to, be able to adopt the modern classroom is extremely important for parents.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I could go on and on and on about that, but that might be another podcast.
Yep, certainly. So we're kind of painting a picture here. Again, the different stakeholders and the industries, especially in schools and teachers, students. What do you want the communities to know? I think there's a lot to unpack just with the regional STEM ecosystems and what's happening there. But what's something that you want overall communities to know about STEM in Alabama?
Well, I'm going to start sounding like a broken record here, but it's that communities, they're an essential partner in STEM ecosystems. A STEM learning ecosystem can't do the work it's trying to do without communities being engaged in that process. One example of that is the support for out-of-school, after-school, summer programs. K-12 schools can be hard places, and that's not the fault of K-12 schools. There's a lot of accountability. There's a lot of standards. There's a lot of burdens that teachers are under that make and schools can be hard for kids. It can be hard for some kids to do well in school. But out of school spaces can be those beautiful, wonderful places where kids get engaged in STEM, where they stay engaged in STEM. And that's where communities can kick in and begin to say, do all of our kids have the opportunity to do a summer STEM program and keep learning in summer? Or maybe the better question is, who has those opportunities in our community and who doesn't? Where are the gaps? Remember, we got to have every kid engaged if we're going to have the workforce we need. We cannot let, especially as kids get into middle school and start losing interest in STEM, we can't let that happen. So I think that's a vital part. But then also communities, when you think about a STEM learning ecosystem, it's really a community. And so communities are also the ones that are going to make sure that all of those stakeholders that I mentioned are engaged in the STEM learning ecosystem. Are all the businesses represented there? Are all the schools represented there? Or is it just part of one school system or one school? All levels? Are all of the after-school, out-of-school programs there? Is the whole community there and moving in the right direction? The same direction.
I really appreciate you mentioning the after-school programs, a lot of the nonprofits that are doing things, because that is an area where we feel very passionate, about. There's so many amazing stories in communities about the nonprofits and the after-school programs that we look forward to spotlighting. And you hit on it earlier. I think it's important that communities realize where some of those STEM connections and things are happening outside of the schools. It's happening in churches. It's happening in local recreation centers. It's happening in public libraries. There's places where, kids and even adults. I mean, there's a lot of great, we call it after school, but these are just after hours programs that even working professionals who are rethinking their careers are going in, to some of these great programs and learning how to code at night or to, be able to make that career shift. And so it's important for communities for us to spotlight those.
Yep.
We might repeat ourselves a little bit, but if we were to fast forward 10 years, where do you want STEM to be? Where do you see STEM being in the state of Alabama? If we fast forward, what do you see? What is your vision there for what success looks like?
That's a really big question. And what I think about with that is STEM success for all students. And it takes me back early in my career in like 1995, 1996, the first set of National Science Education Standards was released. And that's the first major push that said STEM for all. And it was an economic imperative. All kids need to learn STEM. Well, that was science. All kids need to learn science because we need that for our economy to thrive. And before that, science was thought of as only what the bright kids should succeed in, only what the nerdy kids should succeed in. And a lot of times that was also only the white boys who succeeded in that. And I've been working on that. How do we get science teachers and then eventually all STEM teachers and the whole system working so it works for everybody? And I think STEM learning ecosystems is the missing piece.
Yes.
And so if I think 10 years out, I'll be 70 years old. And if I look and most all communities in Alabama are engaged in a STEM learning ecosystem, and most students in those communities are successfully engaged in STEM learning, I will be amazed. I will be excited about and hopeful, really hopeful about what the future of Alabama looks like, because we've never figured that out before. We've never figured out in the American education system, how do we get all kids to succeed? But the STEM, so part of that with STEM learning ecosystems is when the STEM Council was founded, I was given a plan. And as I looked at the plan and started executing the plan that was given to me, there was no way to work to build the grassroots level. And so that was the one thing that I asked that we could add into the STEM Council's like strategic plan. And then that slowly, that focus on grassroots, that's where all of this work with STEM learning ecosystems has come from. Because it has, yes, there's a top down. The STEM Council works from the state level down. There's a lot of great people out there that are working from the state level. I could start naming them AMSTI, A+. If I keep going, I'm going to leave somebody important out.
Right. Yeah.
But we also know it has to be bottom up from communities. And so now, and again, I'm back to that amazement of a $5 million state appropriation to build these STEM learning ecosystems with the possibility of another one for next year.
Yes.
I think that's a game changer.
It is.
I really think it is.
And you use the word hope. I mean, everything that I'm witnessing right now, and the reason why we're sitting here at the table together is because there is some amazing things happening. Yeah. I mean, it should give the average student, parent, teacher, community, industry professionals hope about what the next chapter looks like for the state, and that they're going to have a voice in that. You know, I think the formation of the STEM ecosystems, and especially by region. I mean, you talk about the was the term that you used with ties. The Alabama ecosystem is part of the community of practice.
Community of practice,
right? Yeah. But you all you didn't press pause, but you said, hey, the STEM stories and those pathways are actually within the regions, right? The foundation for the state, it's not at the state level. It's being able to channel that and help it spark it within communities in those regions. I really love and appreciate what you all are doing.
No, thank you. I think that one thing that I hadn't mentioned is we know STEM learning ecosystems work. We know that because there is a national community of practice, and we can look around the nation and we can see these STEM ecosystems working across Texas, in Ohio, and I could keep naming. There are links off the council website where people can go and look at the national map of these are. This idea of a STEM learning ecosystem, it's not an idea that we made up. Actually, part of the story is we were trying to figure this out as a STEM council. And when I mentioned we needed something grassroots, we formed a working group. That group came up with the idea of ecosystems. Little e, and we were all kind of like, that's a cool thing. Yeah, we like the idea of forming, a STEM ecosystem. And then one of the members of that working group, Dr. Vicki Carolwicks, who's the president of Wallace State, I remember when she came back and was like, Lee, you are not going to believe it. I looked this up, and there's this thing.
It's a thing.
It's this thing. It's already happening around the nation. And that whole working group, we started looking, and what we realized was we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. We could partner with TIES. TIES is the group that has been coaching and supporting those STEM learning ecosystems around the nation. And I didn't think we needed to start from scratch. So that's where the STEM Council began partnering with TIES and began to connect our work with the work that's already been done. Yes. And one of the powerful things that happens is, and I've already seen this happen, is with people who are trying to form a STEM ecosystem where they can be in touch with a leader from an existing STEM ecosystem, go to a site visit, stand on the shoulders of giants, find out what's already working. We don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, it's great to think about, and there's, you talk about TIES, and you even reference the map, right, that's out there, and showing the different ecosystems and who's part of the communities of practice. And we talked about the Alabama STEM Council's website and specific people. Right. What resources do you want to spotlight coming out of this? Are there specific resources that you'd like to point people to where they can figure out, if they like what they're hearing and they want to get involved, no matter if it's a student wanting to know what opportunities out there for them, or a teacher wanting to make sure that their voice is heard in their community, or even, especially industries. What kind of resources do you want them to know about?
The biggest thing is the council's website. We work to keep that up to date. We work to make it so that people can easily find what they need. So, and also connect with me and my team. But like everything I've mentioned, people can find it in a few clicks. UTeach Alabama, the Chief Science Officers Program, STEM Learning Ecosystems. They can find out all the other things that we're doing. And that way, they just kind of click there, find out what they want to know, find out who they need to connect with. And we also want to help people connect. On our homepage, if they scroll to the bottom, there's a web form where they can, if they want to tell us something, or if they want more information or make a connection, just fill that form out. It goes to one of my team members, who then farms it out to the rest of us, and then they'll get an answer from us.
Great.
Yep.
Lee, is there anybody that you'd like to recognize or thank? I mean, we've talked, we've referenced a few specific organizations that are really helping make this possible. But any others that you'd like to specifically thank or recognize?
Ooh, I'm so glad I had a chance to look at this question in advance, because there are so many people out there. The real privilege of the work that I've done launching the STEM Council is that there was already so much already going on in STEM in Alabama, that I was looking for the niches and the gaps for the STEM Council to step into. But the reason, that's where you start, if I started trying to name them off, there's all of the STEM work that the council is standing on the shoulders of. There's all of the partners. I mentioned the legislature. Mm-hmm. There's my council members who help get it.
It's a wonderful team.
Yeah. I'm very thankful to Governor Ivey, because it was her vision that and the executive order that started the STEM Council. So that was September 2020. There wouldn't be a STEM Council in Alabama if she hadn't had the courage to say, yeah, we're in a global pandemic, but we're also going to launch a STEM Council.
What an interesting time to launch. But so much changed, right? How we work, how we learn, it was happening at that moment. Yeah.
I remember when when we had our first STEM Council meeting in December of 2020, and of course it was by Zoom, and it was virtual because if you remember, nobody was traveling. And I was literally sitting there thinking, is anybody going to show up? And then all of a sudden, cameras started coming on, and all of a sudden, I saw my 49-member STEM Council, and they dove into the work. And for the next year, they were the ones that were blazing the trail on the work that, if you look at our website, so many of those programs is because of those council members who were doing the work to figure out how to launch. I would also have to mention Neil Lamb, who's the chair of the council. He's kept me sane. Neil's a great STEM leader. Anybody who knows him knows how great he is.
Yes.
But Neil is my friend. Neil has been a key support. He has been an advocate. He's at times challenged me. But mainly just a sounding board to help me think through the next steps. And then with ecosystems, I've mentioned Jan Morrison and Ties. We wouldn't be where we are now without their kindness, their support, their mentoring, connections, all of that. And I'm not mentioning now legislative leaders, STEM leaders. But that's the beauty of Alabama is we have so many great things going on in STEM, and each of those has a great STEM leader behind them.
Yes, and you referenced that moment during the pandemic when all of the faces started popping up from your council, and I mean from my perspective at least, I feel like that's happening again almost at an exponential level as these regional ecosystems are kicking off, right? And as we are interacting with others, right, whether it's through this podcast or a lot of the regional ecosystem planning and design initiatives.
I love that, Scott. That's so encouraging to hear.
And with that, Lee, I really and sincerely want to thank you. I think being a part of the journey and learning from you and your team and just seeing what's happening in STEM in Alabama. Thank you so much for the work that you all have done to be able to get us here. I have so much hope for what is going to happen, as we fast forward, especially in the very near future. And just thank you so much for joining us here today.
Been a joy. I will go to the math that I'm the biggest nerd in Alabama, and to have had this opportunity with the STEM Council to launch all this work, and then thank you for the question about 10 years from now, to be able to take a moment and think, this might just be
feels like it.
The game changer that I've been looking for my whole career. And with STEM learning ecosystems, we just might be right at the edge of that amazing thing.
It's exciting times.
Yeah, so thanks, Scott.
Lee, thank you again.
Sure.
We appreciate it. Thanks again to Lee, the Alabama STEM Council, and Alabama Works for helping us film on location in Birmingham. Please check out the description of this episode for links to the Alabama STEM Council, its programs, and to follow the progress of the Alabama STEM ecosystem. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to subscribe for more episodes and share with others to help continue connecting STEM across your communities. Incubate Talent is powered by Techalon Solutions and its partners, a collective of organizations who aim to spotlight the countless STEM programs offered by schools, nonprofits, and industry by aggregating the stories of educators, students, professionals, and communities through a digital means. Thanks again for listening to Incubate Talent and helping build your STEM ecosystem.